happens, Skype to Skype, and you're the guest today. Starting off, I first heard about you from that interview you did. I don't remember the lady's name who interviewed you, but it was on the Galactic Connection YouTube channel.
Yes,
And
Sandra Metters.
yes, and want to get her as a guest on my show someday too. And
Amazing.
first heard about you there. I did see that there is a picture of you on some interview that you did for the BBC, which is the picture I'll be using for when I upload this to YouTube. Difference there, you didn't have a beard in that interview, and you did when you interviewed that other lady in the recent interview. So, but
That's
either
okay.
way, you're still David Gallup, regardless
Still
of your
me.
facial appearance. So, I guess starting off, I'd like you to give everybody a taste of what the World Service Authority is, what it does. You got the floor, and there's one individual in particular that it seems that this work is entirely dedicated to. That would be Garry Davis. So for those of you who haven't heard of him, please tell us who he is. I will be using your website as a guide, and also all those things that you sent me in that email, the whatever. I'll try to use them as a guide. Don't know if I really need to use them because perhaps everything is on your website, but I do appreciate you sending me that in case it comes in handy. So
Sure.
starting off, tell it, well, first of all, who you are, who that guy who you paid all your tribute to on the World Government of World Citizens site, Garry Davis, and then tell us what your organization seeks to do.
Sure. Well, my name is David Gallup. I'm trained in French and history. Those are what I studied in school, but I also went to law school, so I'm an international human rights law lawyer. I focus on study and practice and use, not just practice, but actual use of the different covenants, conventions, treaties, and declarations that already exist regarding human rights. But I'm unusual in that most lawyers just focus on what is already exists. We here at World Service Authority and in my work on a day-to-day basis are trying to push law forward to help people to understand that it's not just what's written down, but rights are what we make them. Rights, if you, for example, read the Ninth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, it says the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. So that is basically a big responsibility. We, the people, determine what our rights are. And as a human rights lawyer, I want people to understand that one of our fundamental human rights, for example, is the right to identify ourselves as who we are, that is, as human beings, the right to choose our own political allegiance, which means we can choose an allegiance beyond the nation state as world citizens, and we can determine whatever else our other rights might be. We're almost like, I like to make us akin to discoverers. In a sense, we discover what our rights are as we grow and learn, and then we engage those rights in society and in our communities on a day-to-day basis. So I'd like everyone to know that it's up to us to determine what our rights are and to understand what our rights are and then to claim them. Because if we don't understand them, then we can't claim them. And if we don't claim them, no one's going to claim our rights for us. So that's who I am. But I came to World Service Authority just about 25 years ago to create the legal department of World Service Authority, which provides free legal advocacy to refugees, to stateless persons, to individuals suffering from any kind of persecution. People come to us through email, through fax, believe it or not, still through letters and phone calls requesting human rights advocacy and assistance, which is what our legal department provides. But then in 1999, I became president of the organization. And throughout this whole time, I was working with the man you mentioned, Garry Davis. He was an incredible human being, an incredible political and peace activist and human rights educator in his lifetime. He lived till he was almost 92. And the whole reason that this organization, World Service Authority, exists is really because of Garry Davis and because of what he went through as a young bomber pilot in World War II, who was forced to, as any person in the military is required to do, to kill. And he had to drop bombs on towns in Belgium and in Germany. And he wasn't killing just military targets or combatants. He was killing civilians. And when he came back from the war, he was very distraught, disillusioned with the whole war system, the whole nation state system, and how it forced him to kill others who he would have rather been entertaining, because he was really an actor, a comedian. He really would prefer to have been entertaining people. And not only that, but his brother was killed during the war in Salerno. On his brother's warship was bombed, and he died. And that was really the end of it for Garry when it came to any kind of respect for the nation state system as a system. There's nothing wrong with the nation state, and Garry would always say that the problem is not with the nation state itself, but the problem is with the anarchy between the states, that there's not a common world law that you might say that says that killing on the streets of Baghdad or killing on the streets of New York is murder. It might be murder locally, but internationally it might be allowed during wartime. And that's the idea of having a law of war, and in some respects is reprehensible, that we say that there could be good reasons to kill a fellow human being rather than using a justice and legal system to get compensation or to get assistance when your rights are violated. So Garry Davis stepped out of the nation state system back in 1948. On May 25th, he went to the U.S. Embassy, handed in his U.S. passport, was finally, after 3 days of demanding it, given the oath of renunciation. And the second he stepped out of the U.S. Embassy without papers, without anything but himself, he was in France illegally, because nation states, especially since World War II, have demanded that everyone be papered, everyone be documented. And they almost demand that if you don't have that, then you don't exist. You become persona non grata. It's like you don't matter if you don't have a document. Well, everyone has the right to recognition everywhere before the law. That's reaffirmed in Article 6 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and Article 16 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. So if we have the right to recognition everywhere before the law, if everyone does, that's all human beings, and everywhere, well, that's planet Earth. And Garry understood that. He decided that he wanted to self-identify as a world citizen, but he kept getting detained. He was actually detained or arrested and detained 34 times in his life. The longest one was maybe about 6 weeks. The shortest one may have just been a couple hours. But in any case, he said, I need documentation, and I need government that represents me as a human being, as a world citizen. And that's why in 1953, he and the hundreds of thousands of other world citizens who had registered with a registry he had created in Paris in 1949 and 1950, he then created a world citizen government of, by, and for the people of the world. And then a year later, or at the end of that beginning of that next year, World Service Authority. So our focus, of course, ever since 1954, when WSA was founded, was to educate the public about their human rights, to provide them with documentation that affirms their human rights, like registering as a world citizen, like getting the world passport, like getting a world ID card or a world birth certificate, or people who are suffering from persecution, a world political asylum card, and to provide the legal backup through our legal advocacy department to document holders, and to, anyway, just to the global public. You don't have to be a WSA document holder to contact us for legal advocacy if your fundamental human rights have been violated. We're happy to try to help when we can and have the expertise to do so. So we educate about, promote, and implement human rights, world citizenship, world law, and we're trying to develop the institutions of law that will help us to live together peacefully. And one thing I should say here at the outset is that when you affirm your world citizenship status, you are not giving up any lower level allegiance. You are just claiming a higher level comprehension of who we are on the planet, who we are in this world as a world citizen.
Thank you. And looking at your World Service Authority FAQ page, this is actually answered here on the page, apparently. What do you mean by citizen? But there are a lot of folks, particularly in the American patriot community, who seem to equate the word citizen with slavery. That stereotypical mentality seems to have a lot to do with the whole 14th Amendment, which actually does not do what a lot of us have been suckered and brainwashed into believing it does. It does not say that all the rights in the Constitution are applicable to everybody in the United States. No, that's the illusionary meaning. In order to understand the true history of the 14th Amendment, what it actually did, check out my interview with David Champion, which was done a few days ago. He talks all about how it has a lot to do with the slaves that were freed after the Civil War and all. But one interesting thing about, well, first of all, do you agree or disagree with the idea that the word citizen, because of the stereotypical mindset of those in the patriot community and such, is a word that equates to slavery? Yeah, first of all, do you agree or disagree with that?
Citizen is if you understand what a citizen is, it means a rights and duties, you might say, or responsibilities within a particular communal framework. And I agree to the extent that in the nation state system, as a national citizen, because you might have to fight and die for a country, even if you don't agree, or you might be told by a whether it's a commander in a military situation or some other civilian in a governmental situation, to do something that you find reprehensible or that is outright wrong, but because you're beholden to that government, you might have to do it. So in the nation state setting, I would agree that maybe slave is too powerful of a word, but certainly subject. We're more of subjects to the government than we are citizens. But that's why we add the word world before citizen, because if you add world before citizen, you're bringing the human to the top level, to the highest level, at least that we can be now, because we're living in this world. We only a few people actually live, you might say, off planet, which are just the few astronauts in the revolving International Space Station. Beyond that, we're all stuck here. So as world citizens, though, our rights and responsibilities match where what they should match at regarding our needs. What I mean by that is, as a nation state citizen, subject, or you might say slave, we have obligations and duties to that government, but our access to that government, our ability to make a change in that government, really is at best nationally every 4 years, at least here in the United States, when we vote for the head of state or the president. But the input on us could be global. That is, we could all die if there's a nuclear war, if there's some kind of major environmental destruction, or even an asteroid coming at the planet. We could all die, and we don't have much say in that as a national citizen. But if you add world in front of it, then what you're saying is your rights and duties are global. The community is the world as a whole, and that means you have the right, whether it's to vote in global elections or global agenda issues, items that will impact you even locally. So, of course, government functions best, that functions most indigenously. That is government that is most local, because it's going to help you to hopefully serve you, because government's supposed to be a service to the public, for us, through us. It's going to help us deal with what we have to deal with locally. But certainly there are issues that are definitely global, whether it's global warming or environmental or water issues, whether it's technological issues that certainly can be better handled at a higher level, and should be. But we should have a say in those. And as national citizens, we do not. So certainly, I guess to summarize in that respect, I would say we're more on the side of subject than we are of actual citizen. But I would make one other point. Citizenship is like concentric circles. I don't know, Andrew, if you've ever taken a pebble and thrown it into a still pond or lake. Well, what happens is you see ripples, right? And those ripples are concentric circles. And that's exactly what citizenship is. First, you're a citizen of your family, the very fundamental unit, you might say, of society that should be protected. Then beyond that, you're a citizen of your city or town. Then you're a citizen of your region, of your hemisphere, of the planet, of the Milky Way galaxy, a citizen of the universe, and if there is such a thing, a citizen of the multiverse. So we're all those citizens at any one time. What makes world citizenship valid is that it's based upon the same principles that national citizenship is based upon, but gives us that, you might say, global understanding. And those two principles are jus soli and jus sanguinis, the right of the earth and the right of the blood. As human beings born on planet Earth, the Earth is our home, so we're automatically makes us citizens of the Earth, or world citizens. And because we're all born, at least as far as I'm aware, of human parents, Homo sapien parents, that makes us also citizens of the world, or world citizens, with our fellow human beings. So this world citizenship, which is unusual and maybe not, people have thought about it perhaps in a philosophical way, but never in a legal, official, and political way. World Service Authority is taking that idea of citizenship and bringing it to the top level to make sure that everybody's rights and responsibilities are met globally.
Right, right. But getting back to the 14th Amendment for just a moment,
Sure.
regardless of what the 14th Amendment is, what it actually does, and regardless of the fact that a lot of people, what they think it does is not what it actually does. One disturbing thing about the 14th Amendment that some sovereign citizen gurus seem to suggest is that in the United States of America, it would be, for all intents and purposes, pointless to try to fight for sovereign citizenship because the United States Citizen Clause in the 14th Amendment implies that sovereign citizenship is not recognized in the 14th Amendment. Now, when I spoke to a lawyer at a Mount Shasta conference that I was at a couple years ago, who is very big on trying to uh, push human freedom and human liberty. And one of the ways he suggests we go about trying to attain freedom and liberty is to do all the things necessary to attain sovereign citizenship, all the paperwork and everything, get off Social Security and abolish your ID and everything. And well, some say, well, this is kind of silly because, well, first of all, if you do not have citizenship, if you terminate your citizenship with any nation or even the world, if such a thing, world citizenship existed, you're basically committing suicide because in real world application, if you can't prove your citizenship, you can't do jack squat, and you'll be lucky if you don't end up homeless for all intents and purposes. And even if you're not homeless, you'll be lucky you're not living in jail trying to do all the things you need to survive just to not having citizenship. But all that aside, another issue is when I told this lawyer that some others have argued that sovereign citizenship is not recognized because of the U.S. Citizen Clause in the 14th Amendment, he said, well, you have to understand there's actually two United States federal constitutions. There's the Constitution of the United States of America, with the word United having a lowercase u, and that Constitution refers to the consortium of several states that make up the nation of America. And then when the United States government after the Civil War became, so to speak, a corporation, the corporation was the name of it is the United States, with a capital letter U in United and a capital letter S in States. So the Constitution of the United States, the second Constitution, is the charter for the corporation that masquerades as the U.S. government, which is identified in one of the 18 enumerated powers as that seat of government in the District of Columbia not exceeding 10 square miles or something like that. So he basically says that if you point out that there's two constitutions and that the first constitution is the one we're supposed to be going by, and that has nothing to do with U.S. citizenship, then the fact that there's the 14th Amendment should not hinder one's ability to obtain sovereign citizenship. So my first question for you is, do you agree with that? And also, do you actually have anything to say about the assertion that it is ridiculous to renounce your citizenship because if you do, you can't do jack squat in the real world?
Well, so the idea that that renounce, well, I'll start with that, the second one first, I guess. Renouncing your citizenship can actually be very difficult. Like I said, Garry Davis was spent many times in a ship's brig or in a county jail because he had no papers. I mean, and even after he had the documents that we issued, there were sometimes officials who refused, in violation of his human rights, to recognize those documents. It does make life difficult when you don't have the typical or standard citizenship that most people have. But I would say that there are about 75 million people in the world that are either internally or externally displaced, of which at least 10 million of those are fully stateless. That is, they live in places where, even though they may have been born there, the government does not want to give them citizenship and does not want them to be really part of their community. There's like the Rohingya refugees, for example, in Myanmar. There's other people like in United Arab Emirates who are like named the Badoon, who have been given actually Comoros citizenship. It's a small island off of Africa. They've been given citizenship by the United Arab Emirates because that government, for an economic reason, would rather them have some other citizenship, even if they're still living in their so-called territory or country, rather than give them the Emirati citizenship, which provides a lot more benefits, I guess that you might say, to the people who are citizens. So renouncing is hard, and people do come to us still because they know what Garry Davis did to ask about renunciation. And we always say, well, there's other things you might be able to do separate from renouncing your citizenship. I mean, we do provide information on how you might do that if people want to, but it isn't easy. You could have a difficult life by doing that, but there's already, like I said, 1% of the world's population is already having a difficult life, who've been forcibly put in a situation of really lacking a citizenship that provides any kind of protection. So that's the second part. The first part was about being sovereign. Well, Garry Davis would like to say that we're all sovereign. Sovereignty is a question of, you might say, power or political power, the power to choose our own political allegiance. So just because you're born in a so-called country doesn't mean you have to have that citizenship. You can claim another status. That's why you have a right to be a world citizen beyond the nation state. No national government can prevent you from being a world citizen. In fact, they can only maybe prevent you something on the same citizenship on the same horizontal level. That is, certain countries will not allow you to be dual citizens, but they cannot prevent you from claiming a higher allegiance because they have no authority over that space, you might say. So we are all sovereign. We all have rights to choose our allegiance and to be who we want to be. I mean, I have the 14th Amendment here in front of me. All persons born or naturalized in the U.S. and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. Well, I've got an interesting story about a fellow who I've been speaking to for about 15 years, back and forth about his situation. He was born in Florida, but he decided one day that he did not appreciate, he's African American, he's black, and he decided that he did not really appreciate how he was being treated, and he really wanted to prove that actually he was never a citizen. Either as a black man or just even being born in Florida. So he went to the state, to the Department of Vital Records of the state of Florida, and asked them, look, can you prove that I'm a U.S. citizen? And the state of Florida said, well, I mean, we can prove that you were born here in Florida, but we have no authority over, who is you might say a federal United States citizen. So they said, well, maybe you need to go to U.S. Immigration. So he contacted U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services and asked the same question. And they said, well, that's really a question for the State Department, which is, in the United States, that's the U.S. government's foreign ministry, is the State Department. So he said, you can't help me with this? And they're like, well, no. So then he went to the State Department, and they said, well, actually, that's the purview of the Citizenship and Immigration Services. We only help Americans who are outside the country. We don't really help Americans. State Department doesn't help Americans here in the U.S. So we went back to CIS, Citizenship and Immigration Services, and they said, well, sorry, if the state can't help you, we can't help you. I guess you should go back to Florida. So we went back to Florida, and they said, there's nothing we can do to help you here. We're sorry. So his little effort seemed to prove, at least in my mind, that there is no real federal citizenship. How do you prove it? And other people, like you said earlier, have told me that federal citizenship really only pertains to people born or living in the District of Columbia and Guam or Puerto Rico or other U.S. protectorates, and doesn't apply to anybody else in the rest of the land. However, I would say that pretty much any immigration or Customs and Border Patrol officer is going to not really consider anything that we've just talked about here. They're just going to look at, do you have a driver's license? Do you have a national passport? And no matter what else you might tell them, that's all they're really going to want to see. Partly because they're overworked. There's just too many people and too many factors to deal with on a day-to-day basis to really delve into that issue. But another quick story, which if you'll allow me here, I have a colleague named Nathaniel. He tried to, he's an Olympic athlete, actually. He tried to renounce his U.S. citizenship, sort of following in the footsteps of Garry Davis, when the Summer Olympics were in Greece back in, when was it, like 2004, I think. And he went to the U.S. Embassy. He tried to do exactly what Garry Davis did, but they kept asking him questions like, are you going to return to the United States? What are you going to be doing after this? And of course, he said, well, that's my home. That's where I'm going. But I don't see myself any longer as an American or U.S. citizen. So they kept refusing. He talked to Garry Davis about it when this was, Garry was still alive. And Gary's like, look, Nathaniel, it doesn't matter what the U.S. government does. You know who you are. And that's the most important question to ask in the 21st century. Who are you? And if you can't answer, I'm a world citizen, well, then we're all lost. But so anyway, you know who you are. It doesn't matter what they tell you. If you claim world citizenship status, even if they still consider you an American, it doesn't matter. Well, so he's like, okay, that made him feel better. When he got on the plane, he kept his U.S. passport in his luggage, only had his world passport in his hand, and went to when he was returning, I think, to Dulles Airport, right outside of D.C., he went in the line for quote unquote foreigners with his world passport. even though, normally he would have gone in the American line or the citizen line. So he finally came up, and then the official asked to see his document. They looked at his world passport, and they saw it, and they're like, well, we don't recognize this, or we're not going to recognize this in your particular circumstance. Who are you? And so he's like, well, I'm a world citizen. And they're like, well, you need to do better than that. It's like, well, I was born in Chicago. Yes, I've been living here, and here's who I am. But this is the document that I choose to identify myself with, and you're obligated to respect it under international law and even under national law, according to your human rights obligations. Well, then that official really was befuddled and didn't know what to do, so he had to get a supervisor. Nathaniel talked to the supervisor, and the supervisor actually was really, really appreciative, and they said, Nathaniel, we really understand what you're trying to do here. We know that you're basically a peace activist, and we understand, you have the right to claim this citizenship status, but, we need to know who you are. Is there anything else? It's like, no, this is, yes, I do have a U.S. passport, but this is what I'm showing. So anyway, a couple hours go by, and finally they knew he wasn't going to budge. And then basically the chief border patrol officer said, throw him on the brig, meaning basically let him come in and don't do anything about it. He's an American, at least in our mind. And so they didn't put anything in his world passport. They didn't put any stamp. They did find a U.S. passport in his luggage, but they didn't put anything in that, and they let him in. And he said, he told the story later to me and Gary, and Gary's like, well, you know what, Nathaniel, then that proves that you are a world citizen. They let you in legally as a world citizen because they didn't stamp you in any other way, and that was, you stood your ground. So what does it really mean to be a citizen? I mean, we're all really just playing roles here as quote unquote American or Ghanaian or French or Chinese or whatever, because we're told that this is who we are. We're stamped on our backside as soon as we come out of our mother's womb. You're Russian or you're Azerbaijani or whatever. So that's not really who we are. It might be who we are linguistically, ethnically, culturally. I mean, even Garry Davis said, yes, I see myself as an American, but not as a U.S. citizen. He wasn't a U.S. citizen, but culturally, certainly he was an American. He loved musicals. He was in musicals on Broadway, and he loved that form of art, you might say. So there's nothing wrong with the nation state system other than the fact that it causes us to kill. And the problem isn't with the nation state system itself or even that citizenship. The problem is the anarchy that exists between those states that allow states to have armies that will then, without notice, go in and either bomb or destroy another place. That's not law, as I said. That's anarchy, and that's the problem. So, I'm not concerned about the 14th Amendment as being a bar for people to claim a sovereign status. If you want to claim that, that's fine. Now, I'm not also saying, however, and I guess make this perfect, clear here, that you obviously could be pulled over or you could be harassed by police or customs or border officials or immigration officials should you claim some kind of other indigenous status. And I think for people in Homeland Security, the word sovereign is like a dirty word. They consider some of those people as militarists or anti-government, and that's not always the case. I mean, there's many people who claim sovereignty or claiming a sovereign status who are perfectly peaceful, fellow human loving human beings. So the Constitution is a legal document, but even the founders of America, they knew that this isn't necessarily all that we need. I mean, if you read the Declaration of Independence, it actually talks about how we have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And if government no longer fulfills those ends, then we have the right to create new government. So even the founders of America knew that it was important to have the idea that we, the people, are the ones who are in charge here. The government is supposed to serve us, not to control us, like you said, is sort of in an enslaved way.
Thank you. But one conflicting issue about this is that the issue of immigration seems to be an area where rights clash. Now, why do I say that? Well, David Champion, who I interviewed a few days ago, he said in a video that he did that's on his channel when he was talking with some guy that he thinks Donald Trump's plan to ban all Muslims from America is asinine and ridiculous. However, he did stress that we need to understand that immigration is a privilege and not a right. And he said the reason immigration is a privilege and not a right is because the people of a nation have the right to ask their representatives in government to secure the border and also have a right to ask their government to do a vetting process on anyone or anything that attempts to cross the border. Now, when I was at that Mount Shasta conference, I remembered seeing a poster that was basically saying when we see higher consciousness and great things happen on planet Earth, we will see the end of all sorts of unpleasant things, and it listed all sorts of things that anybody looking at that would say, oh great, I'd love to see the end of that, wouldn't that be great? But the last thing on the list was borders. And when I saw that, I'm thinking, well, maybe the guy who wrote this is who made this poster, this list, he's living in a utopian dreamland. I mean, you have to understand there is a conspiracy going on in the world today where the powers that be are attempting to bring immigrants from like Middle Eastern countries into other countries. Like in Europe, this is very prominent, especially Sweden. Sweden's really suffered from this, and also the United States and Canada have as well, not just with Middle Easterns, but also from Mexico coming across the Mexican border, and that ties into the whole thing about Trump saying we're going to build a wall, as if that's going to happen. But anyway, the point is, one could make the argument, okay, well, this is an area where rights clash, because why don't these immigrants have the right to travel across the border and claim that they're just exercising their right to travel? And well, one could say, well, when it comes down to it, immigration does require you to, when you immigrate into a nation, to obtain citizenship. So that raises the question, okay, if an immigrant does not want to obtain citizenship, even though it may cause a lot of problems in life, if he just wants to cross the border and not obtain citizenship, then can't he just claim that he's exercising his right to travel, but he's crossing the border? Well, in by standpoint of law, you would think, yeah, the answer to that question is yes, but in practice, no, because if the people of a nation in exercising their right, as many assert, to secure borders and vet immigrants any way they want their representatives to do so, they can certainly, as part of the requirement, demand that a immigrant who's coming into that nation has to obtain some sort of citizenship. And like I said, for these reasons alone, this is why rights clash. But when you realize that, yeah, there's a conspiracy to bring immigrants into countries, to destroy the countries, Cloward and Piven style and all that, and these immigrants are doing terrorist attacks like all that in the name of ISIS and Allah and such, one could say, okay, well, it's obviously not a bad idea to treat immigration as a privilege, and it's definitely in our best interest to require these immigrants to obtain passports and visas and be vetted, although the extent to which vetting is necessary, be it light vetting or extreme vetting, is debatable. And also, some would say some vetting is a flat-out violation of rights. I mean, Ellis Island. When immigrants came to Ellis Island, one of the things they had to do was wait at Ellis Island so they could be they could be tested to see if they had some sort of a disease. And one could say, well, that's a violation of one's right to be unreasonably searched. You have no probable cause that their body has an illness, but you're checking them anyway. But of course, the counter argument to that is, no, immigration's a privilege. We have the right to do this, and because the people have the right to keep their country secure and have their representatives do whatever they can with that. So, like I said, an area where rights clash. How do you see this issue? And if you're going to say, okay, well, let's forget about all that stuff about vetting and all that, let's just take a chance and let everybody in, how can you do that and not expect people to say, dude, you are a suicidal libertarian?
Well, so I'm not opposed to vetting, actually. In fact, I think it's important that we know who is traveling where, because if they do something to harm a group of people or even one other person, we need to be able to catch up with them. that is crucial, and I think that no matter, even in a perfect world where no borders would exist, where we wouldn't need them, where we're all see ourselves as one human family, you're going to still have police, because there still will be people who, for whatever reason, are selfish or greedy, or just have mental instability or other problem, that take out sort of an egregious action against other people. And so we need peace and police officers to you might say control who's coming and going. But I don't see it as a question of stopping people and impinging upon their right to freedom of travel, as long as someone can prove, in a sense, that they haven't harmed anybody, or that they don't won't intend to harm anybody. I mean, it's hard to know what the future holds, obviously, for any one person, whether they're born here or anywhere else. But I do think so. The point is, when you step off an airplane, the border official knows that you're not a grizzly bear. They know that you're not a shark. They know that you're a human being. They know that you have rights, and those rights should be respected. Not that they shouldn't ask some questions, not that they shouldn't necessarily take some kind of retina scan or something that belongs to you, that you might say is private, just so that they can keep track of you later. But that doesn't mean that they're going to stop you from coming in, of course. So the point is that really, people ask me, David, where do you live? And I say, I live in my body. And then so I say, so it's really, my body is my passport. You shouldn't really need a paper document to go where you want to on your own planet. But there's always been restrictions, even prior to the existence of a national passport system, which really came into effect mostly after World War II, even though there was some degree of it before it. It's really a relatively new experience that we're facing of having to have this, really the last 100 years of having to have a document to ID ourselves. But in the past, even if you didn't have a document or didn't need one, if you didn't have the money, if you didn't have the blessing of the king or the queen, or you couldn't find a way to get onto a ship or something, you still couldn't go where you wanted to go. And even if you did have some of that, sometimes still, because of the color of your skin or your religion or ethnicity, you still weren't able, or even your gender, you still weren't able to go where you wanted to on your own planet. So we're talking about a different future here. And I would also agree that that immigration, when we're talking about immigration, really it is a privilege. But this organization wants us to move beyond the idea of immigration, and that is, we want a planet and we want a humanity that works for everyone. That is, if everyone's clothed and fed and housed and have their basic and hopefully higher level needs fulfilled, there'll be a lot of people who don't even want to leave their home, because that's where their culture is, where their favorite food and language is and all. In fact, here, like in America, where there's been relative stability for the past 100 years, many people only up until recently hadn't gone any more than maybe 30 miles from their home from when they were born. It really took modern, you might say, jet travel to allow people to go to a whole bunch of other parts of the world and to experience other societies and cultures. So, but our point is that there is a fundamental human right, which, like you said, use the word clash. You might say national immigration law does clash with human rights law, or it clashes with our innate, that is born with, and unalienable, meaning you can't give it up, right to freedom of travel. That is, we have the right to move or go where we want to on our own planet. And the only reason why someone should stop you is if you are doing harm or planning on harming somebody else. So but you also need to understand, when there are two laws that are in conflict, the higher level law supersedes the lower level law. So I would argue that even the U.S. Constitution, because in Article 6, it talks about treaties being the supreme law of the land. Well, if treaties are the supreme law of the land, and there are various human rights treaties that the U.S. government has signed, like the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which in Article 12 does affirm the right to leave any country, that is the right to travel, well then, if there's a national law that's contradictory to that, the international law or the human rights law has to supersede. Now, once again, I'm not saying that that's how it's being enacted or engaged on the ground here on a day-to-day basis. It's not. And certainly people want to feel safe. They want to feel safe in their own community. But the difference between being safe in your community and being safe globally is the problem of war. And this is what Garry Davis was really trying to expose it really is an entire adult life, is that the question of not only who we are, but the most important issue in the 21st century is how are we going to secure the existence of humanity and the earth? Because if we don't, all the other lower level issues will not matter. If humanity dies, I die with it. You die with it. If the earth dies, we all die. So that really needs to be on the top of agenda of all leaders of governments around the world. And I just did I had some students in today from American University who were here for a lecture in our office building, and they're studying foreign policy. That was the class that they were taking. And I said, look, it's not a question of foreign policy. That's almost an oxymoron now. It's a question of world policy. It's not a question of national security. It's a question of world security. So we need to start looking at all these issues that are impacting us, whether it's environment, whether it's the flow of people, all the people who are displaced, causing a strain on local communities because they're not expecting that many people to be there. We need to deal with these issues, but we need to deal with them in an integrated, holistic way, which the nation states are not doing. And I also would have to say that the nation states are exclusive. That is, they exclude. If you're not born there, or if you don't have parents who were born there, then you're probably not a citizen. And they don't want you there. They don't want to be bothered with you. Go somewhere else. But sometimes people, because of war, they can't find anywhere else, and they really are hoping for humanitarian assistance. So the concern here is that national governments, in their exclusivity, cannot respect universal rights. Human rights are inclusive. Everyone has them wherever you are. They should be fully respected. But because nation states are exclusive and partial, they cannot fully respect something that is universal and inclusive. And that's really one of the utmost problems with the nation state system, is that it's not built, so to speak, to be able to affirm our rights and duties. I mean, and so it comes down to, once again, what kind of world we want. The kind of world that Garry Davis envisioned, the kind of world that we are trying to create right now through World Service Authority, through the issuance of these documents that help people to identify themselves as human beings first and foremost, is a world that will work for everyone. And it may sound utopian, yeah, but if you told someone in 1900 that in 4 years a couple people in Kitty Hawk would fly an airplane, they would laugh at you, maybe. But even worse, if you told them that someone in 69 years would land on the moon, they would call you crazy, right? So the point is, yesterday's utopia is today's reality. We have the power with our human minds to really dramatically impact, in a positive way, each other's lives, if we just choose it. It's really a question of choosing world policy over foreign policy, world security over national security.
Yes, and specifically regarding the right to travel, I remember in your recent interview with who was that lady who was the Galactic
Oh,
Connection?
Alexandra Metters from
Alexandra
Galactic
Metters.
Connection. Yeah.
Yeah, she did point out that it seems like nowadays a lot of people are more willing to stand up for themselves and not chicken out when confronted with someone in government and law enforcement. Now, one of the most notable examples of this is when you're using your own privately owned car, and for that matter, your own privately owned bike, watercraft, or even flying machine. If you're going on public roads, exercising your right to travel, then well, the whole idea driving is a privilege, not a right. That's only true if you go by the legal definition of driving, which is 100% commercial specific, as is the legal definition of transportation. So as long as you're not using the roads in a negligent or reckless manner, then it's not a crime or an infraction for someone who's not in a commercial capacity using their own privately owned car to use the roads. And even if they run a red light or a stop sign, if it's not done in a negligent way, they can't be charged with running a red light or a stop sign, because there's no because those laws don't actually apply to them. They only apply to those in commercial capacity. The problem, of course, is the government and the police have an agenda to steal money from the common people, and as a matter of fact, so do the car insurance companies, because you don't need car insurance unless you're a commercial driver, but the car insurance companies don't want you to know that. They have an agenda to rob the people as well, so they sucker us into believing these laws apply to us. And if you're ever confronted in a situation where, like, you commit some sort of a traffic violation and an officer pulls you over, There are people that specialize in this, like Eddie Craig, who's host of Rule of Law Radio, is one of the best examples of someone who fights for people's rights like this. Back in April 2013, did a masterpiece presentation on YouTube called "Secrets Police Don't Want You to Know," where he exposes all this stuff, and also he gives a well-articulated 16-step script of what you should say to the police if they pull you over or stop you at a checkpoint or any general police encounter, but it's mainly for traffic stops and such. And he also has a cross-examination script, like if the police try to write you the ticket anyway and take you to trial, this is how you're supposed to fight it. Even a red light camera, if you get a red light camera in the mail, how you fight it. The problem is there's a lot of people now. Even though Alexandra did say that more people are standing up for themselves and defending themselves, a lot of people are too chicken, for lack of a better word, to try that. They're just going to give it anyway and show the cop their license, basically saying, I'm in commerce, even though I'm not technically in commerce, so you can charge me with this crime that doesn't apply to me. But a lot of people wouldn't even stand up for themselves either way, because they fear that if they were to use a script like Eddie Craig's script to defend themselves and invoke all of their rights and make it clear I'm not in commerce, they fear that the cop is going to go ballistic and bash out their window and haul them off to jail. And even though they may be able to beat the rap, they won't be able to beat the ride, and they're not willing to go through the hassle to fight that whole thing. So, and the police have no intention of stopping, even if you rub this in the police face and say, I know that you're breaking the law. Stop now and respect our rights. They're not going to, and neither is the government or the car insurance companies, because if they did, they would lose billions in stolen revenue, and then the whole house of cards would collapse. And that may even cause some problems for the general public, believe it or not. Sad to say, because they've become so dependent on stealing money from people like this. But that raises the question, okay, if the police and the government are going to get violent when we try to stand up for our rights, how are we supposed to stop that and try to make them react in a more peaceful manner? If they're going to continue to violate our rights like this, how can we keep them from going nuts and ballistic and flat out hauling us off to jail if we stand up for ourselves?
Sure. Well, it's definitely in this day and age, as we know, just because of your race, you could be pulled over and treated very, very poorly or even violently by the police, even if you haven't caused an infraction, sadly. So that's one issue, obviously. I think one of the things that we talk about when we're telling people about how to use the World Passport, for example, which is, you might say, a revolutionary tool, but revolutionary in a peaceful means, it is like a civil disobedience tool, you might say. In some respects, you become a human rights educator and activist when you use it. It is a challenge to the system. It's a challenge to what a border official or even a police official, if you showed it to a police officer, what they might be used to seeing. So we always tell people, certainly appearance is really important, appearance and tone. So, as long as you're dressed, as well as you can dress according to your economic status, you're clean shaven, or you're wearing a clean shirt or whatever, if you can, that can be helpful. How you appear, how you speak to the police officer or the border official is also really important. You have to speak, calmly. You cannot get angry, even if they are getting angry at you, even if they're threatening, you with their fist or maybe a weapon. You have to say, calmly, and say, I'm sorry, I'm not here to challenge you. I'm here to challenge the question of the law and how it's being applied. So it's a question of appearance. It's a question of behavior. And I think Garry Davis was certainly an expert in knowing how to deal, because he dealt with so many embassy, consular, border, and immigration officials over the years. He knew how to talk to them. He was also, for part of his life, he was a water salesman. He sold Culligan water purifiers. So he always said, David, look, when a border official says no to me, that opens the conversation. The no is just the beginning of the conversation. And in fact, when he used to visit family up in Canada, when he lived in Vermont, he would go to the border, and the border official would say to him, "We don't recognize that passport." And then Garry Davis would say to them, "Well, I recognize it." They couldn't deny that he recognized it. They might say that they don't, but then that would open up the conversation. Now, of course, especially as he got older, a white old man, might have received more respect than a young black woman might at a border or with the police or whatever. So certainly how we appear, just our natural traits might unfortunately either positively or negatively impact how we're treated. But I guess it comes down to staying calm, but also really it's key to know your rights. And I think your colleague, Mr. Craig, does a wonderful service to the public to educate, which could be dangerous for him potentially for sharing, information that governments may not want people to know. But it's important that we learn our rights. That's why every time we give out issue a world passport or issue a world citizen card to somebody, we give them a copy of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights so that they can read their rights and know them and feel empowered by knowing them. So certainly watching those videos. I know the ACLU has videos now, especially for all the people in a immigration concern who might open a door for a police officer about whether they have to open the door, how to do that. Is there a warrant required? It's really a question of teaching and learning that the public needs to get. And I mean, I even get sometimes yelled at when I'm talking to somebody about a car, like you said, the word car. They're like, David, no, it's not a car. It's traveling in a conveyance. They don't even use the word car or automobile. They're like, no, because even that's still in commerce. So I mean, I'm always learning about it. Sometimes people even ask us, can I use my world passport to quote unquote travel in my conveyance, basically drive, in colloquial or layperson's terms, to drive my car. And we always say, well, look, is there a right to drive? It certainly doesn't appear in the Declaration of Human Rights. It doesn't appear in most international treaties, although there is an international driving convention. So there might be a fundamental right to drive, but how do we engage that in a community? And certainly, obviously, you want people on the streets to have been somehow trained so that someone who's never seen a car before won't even know what to do with it or how it starts or anything else. So certainly there is some, unlike your ability to speak, for example, as long as your I guess you might say your brain system is functioning properly, as long and your ears are working, you listen to other people talk as a baby and you learn how to talk. No one, I mean, I guess there's sort of, what do you call it? Inherent learning that you do, which is, completely different than conducting a conveyance might be, where you actually have to be, person to person, you might say, or machine to person trained how to use it. So, I mean, once again, knowing our rights is key, and knowing how to present our rights in a peaceful way is going to be key to dealing with some sheriff or police officer or whoever. But certainly you have to know when you're challenging the status quo or the system that's there, whether you're doing it, in a very strong, powerful, in your face way, or whether you're doing it very quietly, calmly, or whatever. You still could come across an official who doesn't really care about you, doesn't care whether you have rights or not, and can, excuse me, haul you down to the local jail until you can get out and then sue them for false imprisonment or whatever else. So people do suffer indignities. I mean, look what happened to many different nonviolent peace activists over the years. Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, Mahatma Gandhi, etc. I mean, many sort of difficult situations they faced in their life, but for them, of course, it was worth it to suffer those indignities or even to go to jail to make a change in society overall. And certainly Garry Davis, I mean, like I said, I think Martin Luther King was in jail, I don't know, 25, 28 times. Like I said, Garry was in jail 34 times just for the idea of the fact that he wanted to travel solely and principally as a human being and nothing more and nothing less.
Thank you. And looking at the top of the World Government or World Citizens page, there's a quote here from Article 21, Section 3 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I got a little bit of an issue with this quote. It says, "The will of the people shall be the basis of the authority of government." Now, that seems on the face of it an appropriate thing to say, but there's a couple of issues here. First of all, this is, I think, United Nations material, and you have to understand the United Nations, the idea that it was created as an illusion. The whole purpose behind the Second World War was to use the war as justification for consolidating power as a stepping stone to global government, and that, in a sense, is what the United Nations was. So anything the United Nations says that seems to be about universal rights and rights in general, it's all an illusion. And this quote appears to be an example. The average layman wouldn't see what I'm talking about, but what I would say this quote should actually say to make it more appropriate, would be the individual authority of the common folk shall be the basis of the authority of the government. Now, what that means is that what that implies is that the collective authority of a group, be it a government or a police department or whatever, cannot exceed the authority of any individual member of that group. The most striking implication behind that is that it implies that government and law enforcement folk do not have authority to charge us with a crime unless we cause and or intend to cause harm to another person or property through either negligence or deliberate intent. And that in turn means that everybody, regardless of their age or what nation they live in, has the right to do anything that does not result in anyone causing or intending to cause harm to another person or property through either negligence or deliberate intent. And the whole thing about individual versus group authority is based on the idea that if you can't order or force someone to do something as an individual, you can't get together in a group of people and do the same thing because you never had that authority as an individual. Therefore, getting into a group doesn't grant that authority any better. The only time that a group can actually use force to cause harm to someone else is when that collection of force is necessary to protect the rights and property of some other individual group that doesn't have the ability to stand up for themselves because they're outnumbered or whatever. And there have been those that asserted that that is technically the one and only authority we ever gave government, to exert by any force to protect the rights and property of any individual group under the auspices of that government who cannot stand up for themselves. So we need someone like government to help protect them and not have their rights violated. So that is why I think that this quote, even though it may seem like an appropriate quote to make for the world government of ordered citizens, it's kind of an illusionary, and it's not an appropriate quote. The will of the people shall be the basis. No, it should say the individual authority of the common folk shall be the basis of the authority of government. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights is trying to sucker us and scam us with this quote, I assert. Do you agree or disagree with my analysis here?
Well, these are just words. If you want to put it the way you put it, I completely agree. I mean, people actually on our application forms, on one of the forms, we have basically an attestation of understanding, which everyone who gets the World Passport, for example, or the ID, etc., has to sign. And it actually says on it, I swear that the information on this form is true and correct. Some people say, well, according to my religion, I cannot swear. Can I say asseverate or can I say affirm? And we're like, sure, it's the same meaning. Words are just, terms of art that unfortunately, lawyers try to keep to themselves so that, like you said, sort of pull the wool over other people or society so that they can be paid for their pulling of the wool. It doesn't have to be that. It could be, we the people of the world, in order to form a more perfect world. It could be that, it could be a play on the beginning of the U.S. Constitution, or the words that you exactly use. That's our intent is really to help people to know it's you and me, we, all of us, who should be understanding that we have rights. We also have duties to each other. And because it's hard to not live in a society, because there's so many of us now, that it would be better to live together in peaceful ways than to be fighting each other and destroying our home, which is the earth, so much. Now, and I think your point about the UN, of course, though, is important. Garry Davis used to say, well, the UN was dead on arrival. That is, how can nations unite? Only people can. People can unite as, people have united as Americans. We were saying people can unite as world citizens. That can be a valid, legal, official citizenship that everyone could have, even if they have none other, or even in addition to any other. So this illusion, you might say, or the smokescreen, as Garry would like to say, of the UN is problematic. Because people think, oh, well, the national governments are resolving a lot of their issues and they're discussing it at the UN. But the UN, if you've ever visited the Secretariat in New York, there's a brochure that they give out to all visitors. And the first thing it says in the brochure is the United Nations is not a world government. And it's not a government. It's really a place for nations to squabble and discuss things. And because there are 5 permanent members to the UN Security Council, unfortunately, who have the world cannot get much done because they have the veto power and can say no. If one part of the world, one power in that 5 power control system says no, then even if the 4 other main powers say yes, it won't happen. So it's a question of our rights and duties being limited, you might say, by a system that's still affirming the power of the nation state, and even the power of the nation state to wage war. Now, that's not to say that there aren't some amazing aspects to the United Nations, like its agencies, which, if they didn't have their hands tied behind their back by the national governments, would be able to do even a lot more than they're already doing. I mean, the fact that organizations like the World Health Organization, which is a UN agency, has pretty much rid the world of certain childhood diseases, or at least almost, is amazing. I mean, we wouldn't want to turn the clock back on those kind of advances. I mean, or even the Food and Agricultural Agency providing better ways of farming to local communities so that they can have more sustainable crops and all. I mean, these are things that the UN agencies are doing, or even the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees finding places for people, housing, you might say, or temporary housing for people to stay in so they don't freeze to death. I mean, these kinds of things, which are sort of band-aids, temporary bandages on the problems that are going on. It's good that they're there, but it's certainly still, once again, the United Nations is not enough. We need to move beyond the nations. We need to move beyond the United Nations. And this is what this World Service Authority is about. So, well, but back to your wording, I mean, once again, it's really just to get across the fact that it's we, you and me, we and everyone, we the people who, or we the folk, may be a better word, like you said, who are in charge, even if we don't know it.
Thank you. A lot of people will agree to disagree on words and semantics, but you have to understand when it comes to law, you don't use the proper words and semantics in the courtroom, it's going to come back to haunt you because you didn't make the proper record of it. So I do think, in many regards, it's kind of an important thing to take into account. Also, another thing that's important to take into account, looking at the bottom of your frequently answered question page, you have here a bunch of things regarding taxes and the IRS. I just finished reading Dave Champion's book, Income Tax: Shattering the Myths. He exposes that the income tax laws do not say what we think they're supposed to say. The 16th Amendment does not do what we've been suckered to believing it does. And phrases like, just like how transportation, driving, those are commercial terms. Same thing is true with tax law. U.S. person does not mean anyone and anybody in any of the several states of America's general public, and that, and like a gross income and terms like that, they all mean different things because words in law have different definitions than that our terms have different definitions than the same terms word equivalent in the standard English dictionary. So that's how the IRS suckers us. And as far as how you would go about not paying income tax in the event that the government, if the IRS comes after you, are you totally screwed? Well, if you were to try to somehow use all the information in that book, I suppose the best way to fight the case would be to, at trial, tell the IRS, where's your proof that I have to pay you this money? And then they'll try to read the laws, but whenever they use one of those terms or phrases that means something other than what we've been suckered to believing it means, that's when you would object and say that that term assumes facts not in evidence that was not previously agreed to, and would require a legal conclusion. Just like how if you're Eddie Craig asserts fighting a traffic ticket, best way to do it is say I was not engaged in transportation in the first place, and anytime the prosecution or the judge attempts to use those words that have commercial specific definitions in law, make sure you object to them. And sooner or later, if you keep doing that, if you have confidence in everything, the courts will eventually decide, okay, you obviously realize that we're trying to scam you. You don't care that we're trying to run you through the ringer. We're just making it hard for ourselves, trying to make things hard for you, so you're free, case dismissed. But then once they do that, they start going to their evil ways all over again and start taking advantage of all the other people that don't know how to stand up for themselves and continue to steal money that way. But when it comes to the IRS here, if the IRS all of a sudden were to notice that you renounced your citizenship to obtain world citizenship through this program that you run, how can you be sure the IRS doesn't come after you? And if they do come after you, would you think, okay, the way I've just said you would fight the case by objecting to certain words that only apply to people in the category that the taxes actually fit to, then you should be okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is something that Garry Davis did. He didn't object to all taxes, taxes that went to building schools and infrastructure, or even local taxes to help the roads, or whatever, or increased democratic participation. He was all in favor of that, but he was not in favor of war taxes because, as a former bomber pilot, he knows the scourge of war and what it meant for him, his family, and for the other people he was in the military with. He felt that paying, and especially in the nuclear age, paying taxes to promote I guess, the means for war is actually, he couldn't do that in good faith because he knows that that could lead to the end of the world, total global destruction or omnicide. So he would not pay his portion of his taxes that went to war. I don't know exactly what equation he used to determine that, but anyway, and because he was not a U.S. citizen and he wasn't really here in the United States, quote unquote, legally by the U.S. government, it's as if he didn't exist. Although he did have a social security number, and at one point the U.S. government did try to come after him, and he kept sending, like you said, sort of repetitive certified return receipt letters to the IRS office explaining that the laws that they say applied to him did not apply to him. He wasn't, like you said, either acting in commerce or acting as a quote unquote citizen who would be taxed, etc. And he kept doing it. He kept doing it. I don't know how many certified letters he had to send, but maybe after the 10th time, he never heard from them again. So I know in his circumstance that he was successful. I cannot say that that's true for everybody that I know, though, because I had another colleague who had also decided to not pay his taxes that go to war. But he was employed by this organization, by WSA, and the U.S. government did actually start to garnish his wages, which is they force the business or entity that pays the individual to pay the person's taxes for them and to take it out of their salary by force, you might say, or you get shut down as a business. So that didn't work out for him as he hoped, because even though he wasn't paying it, I guess the organization was pulling it out on his behalf, you might say. So I'm certain that once again, if you don't know, like you said, the terms of art, as lawyers call them, or the proper legal terminology to prove that you're not a citizen or not engaged in the activity that particular law covers, well, then it does cover you. So you have to understand that the wording. You're right. I didn't mean to not imply that understanding the law and those words in the law is unimportant. It's extremely important. You're right, especially if you're going into their court, into their admiralty court, and accepting that jurisdiction. Now, there's a lot of people who come to us, claiming asylum status, who say, why do I don't need to go into their court. That's, that has nothing to do with me. I'm not going to go into their jurisdiction. But not many people have told me how they fared when trying to do that. Or maybe they have their straw man go into the court, or they represent as the trustee or something over the straw man. Maybe they go in that way. But I guess my point about the different language that could be used on our website regarding, we, the folk who are determining what we want to see happen in our world or in our community, is that law is really just a human construct. Every law, except for a few laws, like the laws of nature, you might say, like gravity. Gravity is a relatively difficult law to avoid, or magnetic fields or other laws. Those are laws that exist outside of humanity. But every other law, whether it's don't bring a glass to the swimming pool because the glass might break and then you have to drain the whole pool, that kind of rule or regulation. I mean, why do we make laws? We want laws. Laws should be common sense, something like for our code of conduct to help us be safe. They should affirm the sovereignty of the individual to choose what to do, and they need to be fair and just. If they aren't fair and just, well, then that law needs to be overturned or repealed or whatever else. So I guess my point here is that law as a human construct is something that we need to understand about all law, and then focus on the laws that are really helping us to do what we need to do to improve our lives, and on the ones that aren't, figure out a way to get rid of those.
And from a standpoint of what you classify as law and all the other people that you work with in the world government of world citizens, it has been asserted by some that we've been totally suckered into what law is and what isn't. In fact, Eddie Craig, Rule Law Radio host, he listed like 7 deadly sins of words. Like if you're pulled over and they take you to court and you have to fight the ticket, you object. Not only do you object to the words that have commercial definitions, but he even added an 8th deadly sin to that list of 7 deadly sins. And the 8th deadly sin is the word law. A lot of people would see that and scratch their head and wonder, well, that makes no sense. Why would you object to the word law in a court of law? It seems so counterintuitive. It appears downright ridiculous. Well,
Right.
Craig explained that statutes, codes, ordinances, and even case law rulings, they're not technically laws. The word law doesn't actually have any definition other than what you find in the Standard English Dictionary. But those words, those things, statutes, codes, ordinances, and such, they're actually what someone in government considers to be public policy, which means it's not legally binding upon anybody in the general public, and that is the whole basis behind why you would object to the word law. However, not all countries would classify their laws as the same thing. Now, a sovereign citizen guru like Winston Stroud, for example, and he did actually tell me this when I had him on my show. He said, as far as I'm concerned, there's only 2 laws: do no harm and love thy neighbor. Okay, but if you're going nation by nation style, here in the United States of America, and Eddie Craig has explained why where he bases this claim on, that the only 3 things that are laws are the federal constitution, the 50 state constitutions, and the bills that are legally and properly signed into law by the governor. Emphasis on legally and properly to make sure those bills go through all the proper channels in the state constitutions. But of course, in foreign countries, there is no federal constitution. There is no state constitution. I mean, there may be provincial constitutions and bills which are signed into law by the equivalent of the governors of those provinces. But my point here is that a law in one country is not the same as a law in another country. If you're determining law based on that, Craig's analysis of what you use to determine when you object to the word law in a court. So how does this whole thing that I brought up about how laws are different documents, I should say, different documents in other countries would be classified as laws, just like different governments in other countries would be considered to be public policy, the former of which is binding on everybody and the latter is not. How does that factor into the work you guys do at the World Service Authority?
Yeah, our focus is, I guess you might say, it's not so much on law, however you define it, as much as it is on rights and duties. That is, we have certain rights and duties that we determine ourselves, you and me, everyone determines what they are. We can claim them, and then I guess the rules and regulations come in as to whether or not when you're trying to exercise them, someone else will feel obligated to respect those rights and duties. I agree with the underlying principle, you might say, of natural law of do no harm, make sure no harm is done to anybody else, or so love thy neighbor, and also keep your word. That is, do what you say you're going to do. But I would say that even though different countries have different rules or even laws in the way that they, I guess, hold people to respect for certain behaviors or actions and inactions, there's still these underlying principles of rights and duties that I would say are universal. Whether you like the language in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, I would argue that those rights, whether they had ever been, you might say, codified, statutized, or written down, or if they had never been, that we would still have them and that we would still claim them. And it might be useful to write them on the cave wall, so to speak, so that everyone in the cave knows what we've agreed upon to be the rules. And everyone should be able to discuss them and hash them out and figure out how those fundamental rights will actually play out in your community, in your society, so that by exercising one right, it won't impinge somebody else's right. And it's certainly a difficult dance to participate in, because you don't want to step on somebody else's toes. You don't want to step on somebody else's rights. But so where do your rights begin and mine end? It's always a difficult question. And I guess maybe the law, or writing down the rules and having a legislative or an adjudicative process, is the way that we've determined. Doesn't necessarily make it the right way or the best way or the only way, but the way that we've found to help us to better exercise our rights and duties. Now, it's not going to be perfect. Humans are not perfect. It never will be. And this is once again why you have police, I think, why you have teachers who teach, whether it's your young child in a social studies or history class, you learn about the previous rules that were set up and whether they were legitimate or not, and where we should be going. And I think it's rights and duties, once again, just like the rules that we create and write down, is something that is what's the word I'm looking for? Excuse me. It's changing. It's mutable. Meaning it can be. It's growing. It's advancing as we advance in our knowledge and in our capabilities. I mean, I think technologically, our ability to really handle this world more effectively and each other more effectively is only going to be enhanced by computer technology or other technology, or even virtual reality technology, as that's the up and coming thing here. Because we can play out situations in a virtual world to see how they might really play out in the real world, and learn from that and take away a good lesson, I hope. So once again, I guess just the bottom line here is whether you just think the state constitution, the U.S. Constitution, and bills signed properly by a governor are just the law, or whether you think I think the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights is a binding treaty. But even that, I don't think it's enough, because once again, I've already said, I talked about oxymorons. International law is really an oxymoron. How can you have law between equally sovereign states who are willing to wage war as a final resolution to conflict? That is not law. So we really need world law. And does world law exist? It actually does. World law exists in three forms: natural, social, and conceptual. How does it exist? Well, so not natural law, because that means something different than the laws of nature. But I already mentioned gravity. That is already a sort of a world government of the Earth. We are stuck to the Earth pretty well, and we have to expend a lot of energy just to get off of it, whether it's in an airplane or a spacecraft. So there's already laws of nature, which are a government that we must abide by. The parent nature is our parent. The laws are social. I mean, they're generally in most societies, and there are exceptions that you might see on a news program, how the very elderly and the very young are taken care of. In most societies, they are. That's sort of a social world law. But there's also something called the Universal Postal Union. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it's a UN agency. You don't necessarily care who the Secretary General is of the Universal Postal Union if you write a postcard to your Aunt Millie in Tokyo and she actually receives it. You've paid a little fee, might say even a fine, for that postage stamp. You filled out the proper rules for putting on her address so that it actually gets there properly, and you send it along, and hopefully in a week and a half or so, she'll actually receive it. Once again, that's like a world government of the post, and it's functioning in the background. You don't care who's in charge, and you probably don't even know who the Secretary General is. It's a guy named Bashar Hussein. It doesn't matter who it is, but because it's a government that's of a service to us, and we pay a little fee to get our right to express ourselves, the right to freedom of expression when you're sending a postcard, to be engaged or effectuated and successful when we're sending a postcard to a friend. Even an email, where you had to pay a little bit of fee. Every email does have a minor cost, even if it's way less than a penny. There's still someone you're paying to effectuate the electrical impulses to get that email to a friend or relative in another part of the world. And you don't care who's really, I mean, maybe you care because you're a bill, but you don't care who's in charge of the internet domain. You don't care who even necessarily who's hosting your email server, as long as it doesn't go down, as long as they're doing a service to you. That's a government of the internet, you might say, the internet. So there's already world laws socially that we abide by, and our governments of global governmental systems that we respect. We're just saying we need to take the governing structure on a day-to-day basis that we use, the laws that we use, and bring them up to the higher level. And the very last, I guess you'd say, world law that exactly is functioning right now is conceptual. I mean, you ask everybody on the planet what is love or what is peace, and they're going to come up with very similar answers to what those are pretty much everywhere in the world. We all have a common understanding of those things. Those concepts of justice or fairness, love, peace are similar in probably pretty much every community in the world, and that you could say is a common world law that already exists. So we're saying, look, killing someone on the streets of Baghdad, killing someone on the streets of New York, I said that already, should be considered murder, but it's not considered murder in the nation state system. So we want law in place that can be actually enforced by peace or police officers that says that war is illegal. War is the biggest waster of human resources and natural resources on our planet. Nation states together spend about $1 trillion preparing for and waging wars every year. And just 1/4 of that $1 trillion is enough to resolve global warming, resolve homelessness, resolve illiteracy, resolve the debt problems of many countries. I mean, it's a very small amount of money that could really change this world dramatically, make it a great place to live for everyone. I mean, once again, no one should have to feel compelled to leave their home because the laws there aren't being met, because there's some dictator or local official who's in power only for themselves and is really bending the law in their own way for their own benefit and not for the benefit of everybody in the community. So, I mean, whether it's something local or global, I think we need to link the idea of respect for the rules that we want to put in place so that we can live together peacefully, whether you call those laws in the legal sense of the term, whatever that might be, or not. I'm not an anarchist. I am, pro the rule of law. I think it's really important that we understand that we can live together peacefully, but we have to choose it. We have to claim it, and we have to choose it, and and it's not easy though. It will not ever be easy, even in a global governmental system where everyone's basic needs or even higher level needs are met. There's still the possibility of a dictator or someone taking power. So we have to be ever vigilant. I mean, no one, if we could avoid government completely and just live by ourselves on a mountaintop and have all our needs met, that would be, a wonderful world. We could do whatever we want and not have to worry about where anybody else's rights begin. But that isn't the world we're living in, and I certainly appreciate having to, in a sense, be with other people. I enjoy being. I'm a people person. I like being with people, and I like learning about different cultures and societies and religions and languages and all. And I think that's what makes being human interesting and unique. And in a global governmental system, we wouldn't want to get rid of that. We want to put, you might say, the world law in place that allows us to celebrate our differences and to respect them rather than to fight over them.
Okay, thank you. Another issue that somewhat ties into this, because this is an area that blurs the line over whether something is considered a border issue or not a border issue, and whether or not your rights can apply in this, is the whole airport security issue. Now, because everybody seemed to think, well, there's nothing you could do about the TSA because everybody thinks we need the TSA to keep us safe, and because of that, there's no way you can get rid of it. However, the common I've heard some other people say that there's another loophole of sorts that the TSA and the government is exploiting in order to legalize their seemingly criminal activity at security. What I'm talking about is airports, commercial airports that, even though they're in the confines of the several states within the borders of a nation, because the planes there travel outside the nation, to and from nations, those airports are considered to be on the border, even though they aren't literally on the border. And that would tie into the whole issue of immigration being treated as a privilege, and the courts have actually ruled that your rights to be free of unreasonable warrantless searches and seizures, and consequently your right to to not incriminate yourself does not apply at the border. They've created a border search exception of sorts. Now, on one hand, you got people saying, well, that's ridiculous because rights are inherent and inalienable regardless of what nation and regardless of what border you are at. However, what we got into earlier about like immigration being treated as a privilege and all that, that they would assert is the loophole, if you will, that would allow the TSA to do what they are doing at airports, and you don't have any legal recourse for it because you're that's being done to you at a place that is, for all intents and purposes, on the border. Now, when I had David Champion on my show a few days ago, he did talk about how people that have, all this time, people that have gone about suing the TSA have gone about it the totally wrong way. Jesse Ventura, for example, he totally screwed up when he filed his lawsuit against the TSA in the wrong court. And when he was asked, well, aren't you going to go file in the right court now? He basically said, what's the point? Now, that was kind of I didn't really approve of his attitude there, but a lot of people have taken this whole what's the point attitude toward this, and I think I probably should have re-listened to exactly what David Champion said in regards to what your TSA ticket, your airport ticket says, and how you can go about filing a suit. And he did say, if anybody wants to try this, well, first of all, make sure you file in the right court, and second of all, do it in this manner. Now, this whole all this I brought up, you seem to think, one would think, okay, maybe this does tie into the world passport thing, because if airports are on the border, who's to say you can't just rub this passport in the TSA's face and say, you can't search me because I'm a world citizen, I'm going to walk right through this checkpoint and you're not stopping me. Now, if you do that, and they're probably going to tackle you and knock you to the floor and take you to jail if you don't agree to get searched, agree to let you and yourself get your luggage searched. But as you can see, there's some loopholes going on here, and a lot of confusion as to whether you can or can't sue them, and if you do, what process are you supposed to be following? Is it ever possible that this world passport and everything you do can allow for TSA searches to no longer be done on people?
Well, I would go back to the question of what you, as a ticketed passenger on it's a commercial flight, I guess, generally, unless you paid to either you have your own airplane or something like that. You've signed, in a sense, an agreement or a contract, even if there's no actual signature. It might be an e-signature, or when you put in the credit card, you've agreed to whatever terms are on there. And I would say, I certainly would not encourage world passport holders, or really any passport holders, to do what you were joking about, and just try to run through, because in this day and age, you potentially could get shot. So certainly that's not the way to challenge the system, I don't think. There's the underlying question of, is there a contract? You are putting yourself in a public space, so to speak, whether it's a border space, an international space, or even a national space. Either way, you've agreed to that contract of how you will be transported from one place to another, and it almost may not matter what you think your rights are, because you've, in a sense, signed them away in that by getting that ticket. Now, there's also a question, though. I remember studying in law school about the Fourth Amendment and the right to be free from arbitrary searches and seizures. And one of the things which was interest was someone who lived in a motorhome, and whether the police would need to actually have a warrant to enter that motorhome. And the answer in the end came to the conclusion of whether that motorhome was actually attached to the ground and could not be easily moved, even though that still might be hooked up to a truck. If it had a skirt, you might say, like a metal skirt or something attached that would have to be undone and then removed so that the whole motorhome could then move. That versus a motorhome that's just either itself has its own steering wheel, or is attached to that truck and can be easily moved. For questions of quickness or something that might disappear fast, the police, it was determined constitutionally that police could, like in a motorhome, for example, that's not attached to the ground, not have a warrant and still do a valid search. But if it is an actual fixed property like a home, then no, you have to get a search warrant. So I guess my concern is people traveling, and I guess the fear or threat or concern over what someone might carry in their luggage or on their person or whatever. and being in a public place means that your rights do become, I would say, you don't obviously give them up, but they become certainly a little bit more restricted for the typical role that governments plays to restrict our rights is for national security or public order, and certainly in an airport setting, especially after September 11th, this is something that they're doing dramatically. And so is it a violation of our right to be free from an arbitrary search? Once again, I guess it depends on more how it's done, the way it's done, than if it is done. Because I think once again, we're living in a community, in a society, and there are going to be some people to do some wrong, sadly. And because of that, if we want to have a safer commute or transportation system, well, then we do give up to some degree the control over how we're handled, you might say. But if you have your own plane and you have your own airfield, if you have your own boat, well, then, although you might have to file a flight plan so you don't, crash with some other plane or with some other boat, the control mechanisms are much greatly reduced if it's your own boat, for example, and you're going out into the ocean to go fishing or even going to a whole other country. So, I mean, once again, I guess it's the intersection of people with a lot of other people where we have to put the rules up on the wall and say, this is what you're going to face, take it or leave it. You know what I mean? And if you can't afford to leave it, then you kind of have to take it in the society. But once again, it's more how we do it than whether we should do it, I think, because we can do searching, we can control how people move from one place to another in a safe and orderly and efficient way with the minimal amount of intrusion on our privacy. But I'm not an expert in that. So how we do that exactly, I'm not sure. But I think it can be done. We have a lot of experts out there who would explain it to us.
Well, I'd like to explain it to you right now in regards
Please.
to this whole thing of, well, someone might have something to hide, therefore we need to violate rights. Well, those that take issue of rights very seriously would say that argument of someone might be hiding something, therefore we need to violate rights is never a valid excuse.
Well, but I'm not saying violating rights. I'm saying put some legitimate, restriction. Just like just like there are time, place, and manner restrictions on the right to freedom of expression. If you don't want your 3-year-old to hear a dirty word, then at 7 p.m. On the main channel on the television, you're not going to be able to say those 7 dirty words that George Carlin talked about. But maybe after 11 p.m. when that child should be in bed, at least what society says the child should be in bed, maybe you allow that dirty word. So the point is there are time, place, and manner restrictions that we think are common sense, that we find useful for the functioning of society. I'm not saying that it's always done right or that there won't be some restriction that might go too far, certainly. But I do think that whether time, place, and manner restrictions, whether it's on free speech or whether it's on travel, are legitimate in a society, whether, no matter what kind of society it is, whether it's a completely borderless society. I still would not want a completely borderless society to not have a police department. It would still need it. But you were going to tell me, was there something else about the
Oh yeah,
violation?
sorry. I just realized I was on mute and didn't.
Oh, sorry.
That
Yeah.
was my
Go
fault.
ahead.
Yeah, I was saying about the police department. Well, yeah, the police one and only job is supposed to be to keep the peace, nothing more, nothing less. Catching crooks is just an unavoidable consequence that comes as a result of fulfilling your one and only duty to keep the peace. But in regards to, I said violate rights, and you said, well, I don't know if violate's the right word. I think another word is restricted. Well, those that are very serious about this would assert that the one and only time that a right can be taken away by force, not through a contract. A contract is completely different. That's a willful taking away of one's own rights to do a private contract. But I'm saying in a case where there is no contract, where everybody is free because nobody's not under contract, the only time that rights can be legitimately restricted is when the totality of the circumstances requires that those rights be taken away, because if they're not taken away, then the totality of the circumstances shows that some sort of harm or damage is going to result to somebody. Now, one would hear that and say, okay, well, that means that the government does not have authority to search everybody just because some one person might have something hazardous to hide. So that is often used as the argument of like why the right if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. Well, many assert that argument does not hold water because if you are hiding something incriminating, then you have the right to refuse to reveal that you're hiding something incriminating unless the people attempting to prosecute can show probable cause that you are hiding something. And the excuse someone might have something to hide is not a valid excuse because might have something to hide or might be a risk is totally incompatible with the totality of the circumstances criterion. Now, of course, there's situations where the totality of the circumstances does require that rights be taken away, or restricted, or such. This one good case of this is the whole issue of freedom of speech in like a trial setting, like in a courtroom where the courts have to follow some sort of a procedure to get a sentence and a verdict. They couldn't possibly follow all those procedures if everybody could babble away about whatever they wanted to and have unrestricted free speech. So that's a situation where the totality of the circumstances requires that speech be restricted. However, the issues of rights involving like unreasonable searches and like not incriminating oneself, those seem to be rights that for whatever the reason people think, well, I don't agree with your notion that the totality of circumstances should be the criteria, and I think we ought to have our rights violated because nobody could possibly feel safe. Well, that's another way of saying I'm a chicken. So I want to be a slave. But the
Right.
but again, the individual authority cannot exceed the group authority. Just because everybody in society wants to have their rights violated is not an excuse that the government can use to take away the rights of you, even if you're the only person in society that does not want to have their rights violated, because a group authority does not exceed individual authority. Now, I can hear a lot of people in practice say, well, in practice that's absurd because you know that the rest of society is going to use force to force you to take your rights. Well, then you better stand up for yourself and fight for yourself, and dare I say it, maybe even kill someone if they're trying to force you to take your rights. Because hey, there's court cases out there that say if the police use more force than necessary to arrest you, then you have the right to kill them. Wouldn't advise it, but that is still your right. So this idea of totality of the circumstances clashing with might be a risk. I do hope that now that I've tried to make sense of this, you're going to side with the people who say, yeah, if the totality of the circumstances criteria is not met, then there is no authority to take away my rights, no matter how many other people want to be a slave.
Well, oh yeah, I mean, we have to make sure that people, especially like you said near the beginning of our conversation today, who might be in a situation of impoverishment or might be in a situation of illiteracy or whatever, and just don't know their rights, and they need protection, maybe even more so than someone who does know their rights and know how to claim them, and they should not be suffering just because they didn't have the luck or the possibility to be in a situation to understand and claim their rights effectively. So certainly, no, I do agree. I mean, once again, if the totality of the circumstances doesn't require it, then we should be able to stand upon full exercise of our rights and responsibilities without any restriction. I would even say that the most hardened criminal who, it's proven by, who even agreed, yes, I did that act, I murdered that person or whatever else. If they agreed and went to jail and all, they still don't lose their rights. They have them. They may have been then in that case legitimately restricted, but when they get out, say they get out, 30 years later, their rights really should be fully restored. They should not be restricted from travel or restricted from voting or whatever else. They've done their debt to society. They've hopefully done community service or whatever else they needed to do. And so because you've never given up your rights, then you should have them back fully. So yeah, I agree with you.
Thank you. And all right, seem to be running out of possible questions I could ask you. Got about 20 minutes left, but okay, let's jump off into the deep end here. The future of what this could potentially have in store for us. Okay, let's say you do succeed in this whole world passport thing, and people are able to make use of this, and maybe even replace current passports with this world passports to get from point A to point B on this planet, be it on land or water or wherever. But let's go off the deep end and say maybe a couple of centuries into the future. when people have the ability to travel off planet. Now we're going, like I said, we're going off to the deep end here to suggest that this world passport can actually be converted into a solar system passport or a galactic passport, where people that have created like their own private rocket ships or even some sort of technology which allows them to exploit the fact that space and time are actually illusions and teleport to wherever they want in time and space, in this matrix of reality that we're living in. Well, maybe 100 years down the line or so, we won't be living in a matrix anymore because we'll have a much higher consciousness. But my point is, if we do attend areas of much higher consciousness, then we should, by virtue of the fact that everything in the universe is consciousness, be able to travel from places off planet and maybe even intermingle with some other ET races that are out there a lot more openly than people do today, where it seems like only the contactees are the ones that have the and the tyrants in government, when you're talking about the bad ETs, but the good ETs, only the contactees are the ones that have the privilege, for lack of a better word, to communicate with them. But that may change a few centuries down the line. And if that's the case, I mean, like, this is a few centuries down the line, but do you hopefully maybe see the day where this world passport can be converted into a galactic or universal passport, where increasing consciousness and technology will allow to travel places other than the world we know of as planet Earth?
Sure. We've talked about here just in office about the idea of a universal passport, because the second that everyone knows that we've met an extraterrestrial, we know that this world, so to speak, is not just it for conscious or sentient beings, that there are others out there that we can and need to interact with. So then maybe it can't be just a world passport anymore. Like you said, it needs to be either galactic or universal or metaversal passport, certainly. But Garry Davis would always say this world passport is really an anti-passport. The point is, if we come to such a stage of awareness or consciousness or comprehension of who we are, or our being within this universal system, then we won't need paper. Paper won't matter. Once again, it'll be our mind that will be our passport, as well as maybe our body, if we still even have a body at that point in a couple hundred years. So I don't think, once again, passports, we think passports are ingrained, that they've been around forever, when, like I said, it hasn't even been 100 years, but we're so brainwashed to think that this is all it is, or that the nation state system is the only appropriate actor right now in the world to make policy or to make law or to change it or whatever, when really it's up to all of us, again, as individuals, to claim our rights and duties, to identify. And I think people who already see themselves as world citizens are already ready. We're already ready to meet with whoever the extraterrestrial is out there who's willing to meet with us. I mean, maybe they're afraid to show themselves because we're still such a violent race. I mean, Jean-Paul Sartre, I studied him in college, the French author, intellectual. He used to say, "Nous sommes des sous-hommes à la recherche de notre humanité." We are subhumans searching for our humanity, which I agree with. I think we're still sort of more on the level of sort of beasts, you might say. I wouldn't even use the word animal because animals are not necessarily bad, but beasts to some respect is kind of bad. We're more beasts than we are maybe sentient, and we act upon that side of us more often than not. Sadly, still, I think. But once we are in the kind of world or universe that you're talking about, hundreds of years from now, once again, I don't think documentation will even be necessary. We may even be able to share ideas mind to mind. Come the future with the help of computerized technology. So, where do I see this? Well, I see our work now in helping people to understand that world citizenship can, even here in the here and now, be a valid, legal, official, and political status. And the importance of that is because, for example, those 65 to 75 million displaced and stateless people, when they go to a different place because they're trying to save their lives, they may not get their rights respected because they found themselves in a tent or a hut or something, and not able to go to school, maybe not able to work. So the rights are certainly dramatically being restricted. Well, we're saying that as world citizens, it doesn't matter where you were born or where you're from, no matter where you end up on this planet, you should have at least your basic rights and needs met. It's a question of understanding that we are human beings first and foremost, universal beings, you could even say. I mean, I know Alexandra Metters from Galactic Connection would affirm that idea. So it's a question of taking where we are now and saying, how can we get to this illustrious future? Well, we can't just be armchair activists. Garry Davis would say, look, people might give their $25 to some peace organization or human rights organization. They paid their dues, basically, and then they can let those other people do the job of changing the world, of improving the world that we live in. Well, he would say no. He would say, I am not a peacemaker. I'm not for. He would say, I'm not for world peace. I am not for world citizenship. I'm not for a world citizen government. He would say, I am a peacemaker. I am a world citizen. I am creating the institutions of and structures of organization, systematic organization at the global level that will help us to live together peacefully. That's what I mean, in other words, for a world citizen governmental system. So we can't just sit by the sidelines and try to have somebody else do it or pay dues to some organization. We have to claim this citizenship and this peacemaking status in the here and now. And like I said, though, just in case someone didn't hear it, you do not give up any lower level allegiance or authority or rights or duties or anything just by claiming world citizenship status. You're really just adding that higher coherence, that higher consciousness or awareness to your comprehension of who you and we are in this system on the earth and in the universe. I mean, I always love to tell the Dr. Seuss story of Horton Hears a Who. I mean, I'm sure most of your listeners have read it or heard about it. Horton, this big elephant, finds this dust speck, and he keeps hearing these voices from it, but no one else can hear them. And they're yelling, "We're here, we're here." Yet some other people in Horton's world who want to burn or boil that dust speck. And finally, one of the smallest people who in the small dust speck, was able to get her voice loud enough that these other people could hear voices and knew that there was a whole other universe or world on this other little dust speck. So fortunately they didn't boil the dust speck. So I mean, we're like, the Earth is like a dust speck, you might say. It's like a desert island floating in space. And it's our only world right now. We aren't 200 years or 500 years from now where we're off planet and having our own new little worlds on asteroids or whatever. We're stuck here. We're stuck with each other, you might say. Stuck is maybe a negative word. I guess we're sharing with each other is the positive way to say it. We're sharing this place, but we're not doing a great job of it. So the idea of world citizenship really is to help us to take some of those principles that we might have learned even as kindergartners, of do unto others as you'd have them do unto yourself, or share, or like you said, do no harm, or have no harm done to others, and keep your word. That's really what underpins this whole idea of world citizenship and how we're trying to implement it in the here and now. But we do have this project, like I said, to make world citizenship a valid legal citizenship. We're working on that really steadfastly now. But we're also working on, and I mentioned it really right at the beginning, the creation of a World Court of Human Rights. And, people might sigh and say, not another court. What's that going to do? Well, I would have to say that the World Court of Human Rights would be a court that would help certainly at least 60% of the world's population right now that doesn't even have a regional human rights system. I mean, at least here in the Americas, to some degree, even if it's not functioning perfectly, or in Europe, or even in Africa, there are courts, the Inter-American Court, the European Court, the African Court of Human and People's Rights. But in Asia, there is no regional court, and if you can't get justice locally within your country, there's nowhere you can go really effectively after that. So we've drafted a statute for a World Court of Human Rights, and if anyone's interested, we have a survey online that people can participate to express their viewpoint about whether they think such a court would be helpful or not for us to have in the world, and it would be a place where individuals, that's the point, individuals should have standing at the global level when their rights have been violated and disrespected or taken away, like you said. There should be a place where they can go beyond the nation state to demand compensation and to demand redress. That doesn't exist yet, but it should. And once again, I'm coming from the perspective of a human rights lawyer. My perspective is to say that we need to have human rights, I guess, sort of reign supreme. I mean, right now they're not. And when I say human rights, I don't just mean human rights. I really mean protection of the environment too, environmental rights, because we wouldn't exist if that dust speck, the beautiful planet Earth, didn't exist. If we destroy it, it's gone, as I said. So we're trying to make that beautiful future that you talked about, Andrew, exist sooner rather than later.
Thank you. A couple more questions. I guess we'll call it a day.
Sure.
First of all, about the current passports that people are using now, the ones that are issued by the state. Have you heard about the truth that all passports do have a microchip in them, which tracks you and is connected to either the NSA or the GCHQ, or actually all of them, because all those surveillance organizations are in some way spying on each other. Everybody's spying on anybody, they say. But do the current passports have such a microchip in them, to the best of your knowledge? And I'm assuming you're going to make sure that these passports that you're making don't have such a chip in them.
Right. Well, so the national passports of the wealthiest countries, at least, although there's about 195 or so, at least, UN countries in the world, and probably a good maybe 30 or 40% at this point do have biometric chips in them, which supposedly can be tracked with an RFID chip tracker, even at a distance of 20 feet, supposedly. I can't verify that. That's what I've been told. But I know I have a world passport and a U.S. passport. I know my U.S. passport does have a biometric chip in it. Now, what I've been told is that the only data right now on that chip is the data that already appears on your passport, like your given names, your family name, your birthplace, your birth date, and the expiration date of the passport. Now, at some future point, most likely governments are going to want to add more data to that, like, where have you been, tracking you, sort of, and maybe, what you've purchased even, perhaps, and to put on that chip. I don't think they're at that stage yet, but I could see that coming. Certainly, currently, the world passport does not have a biometric chip in it. I don't even know if we would want to get that technology, even if we could, because it does seem intrusive. If all the information that you need is right there on the passport anyway, why do you need the chip?
Well, there's a lot of reasons why the NSA would want to chip everybody like that, or be the passports or whatever. And blackmail seems to be the common trend. But have you, by any chance, done any research into whether it's possible to remove the chips from the passports? Because a lot of appliances like cell phones and DVRs and such, you can't actually, the NSA and the corporations that work for them have actually set it up in such a way you can't remove the surveillance chips from the appliance without shutting down the whole appliance in the process. Is it also true with the passport there's no way to remove the chip without destroying the passport? Or if you just find the right spot and use just the right tools, you can punch a hole in the passport and remove it and still have the passport valid?
I don't think you could tamper with the passport. In fact, it might even say, I'd have to look back at the national passport to see, but I think tampering with the passport itself or trying to alter it is actually a federal offense, I think. Or if it's not a federal offense, it certainly would be a misdemeanor. And so I think you would invalidate your passport if you tried to pull out the chip. Now, I'm just saying this because this is what I've heard, but some people, and I don't encourage it, but some people have said that they've taken a hammer to the front of their passport and whacked the front and hoped that destroyed the chip without making any kind of physical impression on the outside of the passport. Once again, I would not encourage anyone to do that, because that's still tampering, whether it's visible tampering or not. You should not do that. So I don't encourage it. I can't encourage it, but I've been told that that's what some people have done. No one's ever told me, though, that that's been effective in the end, whether it made their the chip invalid or whether it caused more problems for them later on because the chip wasn't being recognized at a TSA or other border point. It could also raise a red flag against you and make your situation worse.
Thank you. One more question, I guess, and we'll call it a day. This whole issue of world government, I mean, that's what it says on your website, or world government of world citizens. Now, the idea of world government is something that many in the truth and freedom fighting movements would would assert is definitely not in your best interest, because we all know that the Illuminati bloodlines that that control the powers that be, that are the powers that be, that run all the things on the earth to some way, shape, or form. I mean, in this day and age, they don't control things to the extent that they did years ago, but they're still around. And to think that you want a world government is kind of basically asking to fulfill the agenda of the Illuminati bloodlines, because they want a global government. They've been doing all sorts of things like NAFTA, TPP, the African Union, European Union. All these things are these merging type things are actually plans to consolidate power in a way to eventually lead to the stepping stone to lead to global totalitarian government, which would include world currency, mostly electronic, world army, and a microchip global population. And the one would see your website and think, why would you want a world government? Now, some have talked about having a council of elders, where if any of the elders screws up, they are immediately impeached and fired. However, uh, even that, you wonder, how can you be positive that a council of elders is not going to double cross and betray you? I mean, I'm sure the founding fathers would have something to say about that, because they did everything they could to make sure that governments could not eventually turn tyrannical all of a sudden and betray its citizens. Well, they tried, and it didn't really work out too well, because everything that they stood for has been taken away over the course of time. But the point is, all the people that are skeptical of creating some sort of world government, because they say you're basically asking for a global totalitarian rule. If you're asking for such a government, what would your response be to that?
Well, we're not asking for such a government. The people, are trying to create the governing institutions to make a world citizen government effective. Winston Churchill said, democracy is the worst form of government. And then he followed it with, but it's the best form of government we have. And Garry Davis would say, no one wants, like I said earlier in the conversation, no one wants government. Government is on our backs all the time. It's, with its regulations and its controls, and it's very frustrating. And we can't, effectively do what we might want to do as individuals because of government. But we have nothing to do with any kind of conspiracy theory here at World Service Authority or the World Citizen Government. Even though that appears on our website, we are not affiliated with any wealthy bankers, with the Illuminati, with the Trilateral Commission, or with the Antichrist. I mean, even in the Bible and Revelations, it talks about an Antichrist coming and creating a world government. Well, we have nothing to do with any of that. We are you might say, a grassroots movement of the people, people everywhere, who say, I am sort of either fed up, or I'm just not feeling effectively engaged as an individual as this national citizen. Can't there be something more? Shouldn't there be something more? How do I act as a human, and how can I do that effectively? How can I make a change in the world? And I certainly think dramatically, and just in the past few years, the amazing power that every individual has just by having like a cell phone, and sending out a tweet, or sending out an email or whatever. We have a lot of power to make positive change. It also could be used to make negative change, of course, but a lot of power to make positive change in the world with the tools that we have and with the resources that we have, if we use them wisely. So certainly we see a global democratic, you might say federal governmental system that only provides a service to us as the public, that might have some kind of, like you said, executive council, and also have some kind of world court of human rights and some kind of world parliamentary system. It's really basically just taking up what we've done, I think, pretty well here in America, and say, let's just take it one step further. Right now, if you're in Maine, you can't shoot someone in New Hampshire. I mean, sorry, shoot someone in Maine and then flee to New Hampshire to get away. I mean, because there's an overarching law, a federal law, that says if you murder someone, well, any, like you said, officer of the peace doing their job to prevent harm or further harm can go after you, right? No matter where you are. Well, so we're saying the same kind of thing. We want a world that works for everyone, but that governs, most locally, most indigenously is better, but that still has the resources of a global system that is using resources for all of us and not just for the wealthy, powerful few who are in control, or for the wealthy few corporations that control. I mean, 1% of the world controls, what is it, like 60 or 70, maybe 80% of the world's wealth and capital. And that's there's a problem with that. And we're not here to be Robin Hood. No, we're saying that we can bring everybody up, but it's a question of politics, and it's a question of will, and it's a question of where we decide to choose to put our resources. If we continue to put our resources in preparing for a waging war, then we're going to have a destroyed planet and not many people left on it. But if we decide to take the resources and put them back into the earth and back into our own populations, that is, populations of human beings as human beings, well, then we can have a great world. It's really just a choice that we have to make, and we need to start making it now. Not in 50 years, not in 100 years, when the sea level has made it so high that many countries are underwater, and where do those people go? Right? So we need to make these changes now. That's why we're self-identifying. Anyone who wants to can self-identify as a world citizen, have a world passport, try to exercise the right to freedom of travel. And over 185 countries have recognized the world passport by placing visa entry and exit stamps in it. That's about 95% of all the countries. Not that they always will, and not that you won't have some difficulty at a frontier or at an embassy, because you very well might. And that's the challenge of creating a new and different world in a revolutionary but peaceful way.
And I'm glad that you're doing your best to make that possible, and I wish you the best of luck. It was a pleasure having you on for a couple hours. I gotta get back to work. Took a couple vacation hours just so I can interview now, but I'll be getting back to work. I'm sure you'll be getting back to work, and I will promise to upload this to YouTube, and I'll try to spread this far and wide so people find out more about your work. Great talking to you, David. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Andrew. I really appreciate it.
Same. Take care now. Bye.